Hi, my name is Jessica Martin, and today we will be going over feedback loops in the non-gravid female reproductive system for my reproductive portfolio. So first we'll take a look. This is just a little snapshot of the internal female reproductive system. So typically the reproductive system is responsible for pregnancy and doing that process within the body. However, this doesn't always happen. So when the female body is not in the state of being pregnant or in the process of becoming pregnant, that is called non-gravid. So non-gravid means non-pregnant. And non-gravid females undergo the menstrual cycle each month when that fertilization for pregnancy is not achieved. So that is split into two cycles. The first cycle is the ovarian cycle, and this has 3 stages. The first stage is the follicular phase, which is a period of follicular growth in the ovary. So, for example, you have this right portion of the diagram where the follicle is getting bigger as the days go on. The middle phase is called ovulation, which is when the follicle is ready and the ovary releases the oocyte. So that would be what we see right here at the bottom on day 14 in this diagram. And then there's the luteal phase, in which the ruptured follicle turns into a corpus luteum, which is this star-shaped thing here, which secretes hormones to continue preparation for pregnancy. So the corpus luteum eventually does start to die, and that is when the body prepares for menstruation. In this cycle, estrogen is the dominant, or in the follicular phase, estrogen is the dominant hormone, and in the luteal phase, progesterone is the dominant hormone. The other cycle is the uterine cycle. So the uterine cycle refers to the changes that happen in the endometrium or the lining of the uterus. So the first stage of the uterine cycle is the menses, which is the menstrual bleeding from the uterus or menstruation. The proliferative phase is when a new layer is added to the endometrium to prep for pregnancy. And the secretory phase is this third phase over here that is characterized by a thickened endometrium that becomes a secretory structure. If fertilization or implantation does not occur in the secretory phase, then the secretory epithelium that is seen here is shed in menses. So that would loop us back around to the start. And as you can see here, both the ovarian and the uterine phase cycles are happening at the same time. So they do have an interaction on one another as this process is underway. So the hormone interplay in these cycles is very complex. And as you can see here in the center part that outlines very nicely the hormonal changes along with the changes of the ovarian cycle and the uterine cycle. Kind of shows it all in one place. But they're very dramatic and occur over a short period of time. So we'll kind of start at the beginning here. So on the first day of the cycle is when menstruation starts. So when menstruation starts, we see a release of FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone, that stimulates growth of the tertiary follicles in the ovary. So as these follicles, as we can see them up here, as they grow, their cells are releasing hormones. So there are granulosa cells in the follicles, and those secrete a hormone called AMH, which decreases follicular sensitivity. So it inhibits excess follicles from activating. And then there are also thecal cells in the follicles. And the thecal cells synthesize androgens, which convert to estrogens. And estrogen does have a major role in this process. So estrogen actually, as its levels rise, creates a negative feedback loop on the anterior pituitary hormones, which are the FSH and LH. And that negative feedback loop prevents development of additional follicles in the same cycle. So the addition of estrogen is going to suppress the levels of follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Estrogen is also a hormone that creates positive feedback for its own secretion. So as estrogen is growing in level, it will continue to promote its own growth instead of inhibiting a negative feedback response on itself. The release of estrogen, while it is promoting positive feedback for itself, is also causing the endometrium to thicken down here in the proliferative phase. At the end of the follicular phase, as we can see, estrogen is at its peak. This peak level of estrogen changes the effect that estrogen has on the body in terms of feedback loops. So whereas it previously was a negative loop as it was increasing in concentration, once it's at this peak level, it actually switches to a positive feedback loop. So that means that we are going to see a large release of follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, specifically luteinizing hormone. This is called the LH surge. So as we can see, this peak estrogen is quickly followed by a small peak in FSH and a large peak in luteinizing hormone. The luteinizing surge is very important because it triggers the resumption of meiosis in the primary oocyte, or resumption of meiosis in our dominant follicle, which would be the only follicle developing at that point, and triggers the resumption of meiosis, which would turn that primary follicle into a secondary oocyte in a polar body. About 24 hours after we see that peak in LH, we're going to see ovulation, which is pictured here, in which that oocyte leaves the follicle. The oocyte will go on to move into the fallopian tubes towards the uterus and potential fertilization. But after ovulation, the follicular cells remain. They turn into the structure here called the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum is important because it secretes progesterone. And the secretion of progesterone is very important. It also secretes inhibin. Inhibin causes negative feedback on the anterior pituitary. So the corpus luteum is also going to keep levels of FSH and LH low while it produces the progesterone, inhibin, and estrogen. The progesterone is particularly important in the second part of the cycles. So the progesterone causes the endometrium to thicken into a secretory phase, which means blood vessels are added, lipids are deposited to feed the potential fetus, etc., etc. But after about 12 days, the corpus luteum does die if there's no signs of an active pregnancy. And it will shrink into a shriveled corpus albicans here. And without those hormones being released, the estrogen and progesterone, that removes the negative feedback on the anterior pituitary, which causes the release of FSH and LH again. And again, without progesterone, the secretory epithelium will die in a shed, which will trigger menstruation, which will put us back at the start of this cycle again. So that is our brief review of the feedback loops within the non-gravid female reproductive system. Here is a worksheet to test knowledge on after viewing that presentation. We have a few questions. What are the 2 cycles within the menstrual cycle? What is ovulation? In which cycle is estrogen the primary hormone? What event does the LH spike trigger? And what is the corpus luteum and what does it do? I will submit those along with the slides for this PowerPoint. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you. Bye.